بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم والفضل الجسيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا بفيض فضلك رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our classes on الطريقة المحمدية, this great treatise by Imam Birgivi on the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the path of faith and mindfulness of Allah, we are looking at how to attain taqwa and the sins of the tongue. And today we're looking at the 25th of these sins of the tongue. And this is on what is called a shafa'atu sayyi'ah, the wrongful intercession. And wrongful intercession, as we will see, has been described as a grave sin. And the reason it is described as a grave sin is because of the harms that it contains. Imam Ibn Ashur, who is a great Tunisian Imam of tafsir, in his tafsir, At-Tahrir wa Tanwir, he tells us that the good intercession is rewarded and multiplied in reward because of the great benefits in it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala magnifies the reward of it because of the resultant benefits. So when you intercede in a good way for another, you are rewarded not only for the act, but also the consequent benefits of the act. Right? So this is why, as we'll see, the good intercession is a great opportunity because it's a small act, but it has huge repercussions. So for example, some years ago, I even forgot I did it, and I was actually feeling guilty because when the person asked, I didn't even give it much thought. Someone came up, apparently to Seekers, and they asked, where should we study? So I was actually going off to class, so I just said, think about such and such institute. So they asked me some question, apparently, because I don't remember this conversation, about Amman. I said, it's a nice place to live. So it turns out he's been there 18 years, his kids have done hifz, etc. I don't even remember the conversation, right? And now every time I come, they try to invite me for tea and this and that. I did show up this time, though at the end of the gathering. Other people were leaving, I was showing up late. So similarly, the wrong intercession, which you help someone out in something that is not right to intercede in, may not seem like a big deal. How? There's Auntie Shireen starts Shireen's cake delivery services. Someone says, that cake delivery service seems to be taken on because of some viral videos they recorded with kids. Could you intercede for me to get hired? I don't know if the sister who's asking me even knows how to drive. So I just said, Auntie Shireen, consider so-and-so to be one of your delivery people. So Auntie Shireen's like, oh, my teacher or whatever, hires the person. And, the person crashes the van with all the supplies, and, the delivery service gets sued and shut down. Says, well, I just made a recommendation. So it's not just the act itself that is of consequence, but what are the implications of that? Right? So this is why this is a significant matter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, right? So he says, Imam al-Birgivi says, السادس والعشرون الشفاعة السيئة. Right? The 26th of, I should say 26. The 26th of the blameworthy traits is the wrongful intercession. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that whoever intercedes, من يشفع شفاعة سيئة, whoever intercedes with a wrongful intercession, يكن له كفل منها, shall have the like share of it. Like shall have the right share of the wrong that accrues from it. Right? And the kifl is a full share. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about those who believe and are upright, that Allah gives them kiflayni min rahmatih, 2 full shares of His mercy. So the kifl is a full share, shall have the full share of it. Right? And so that's the وَمَنْ يَشْفَعْ شَفَاعَةً سَيِّئَةً, whoever intercedes with the wrong intercession shall have the full share of it, which is the act itself and its harmful consequences likewise. So there are several key principles here, but one of them is that one is held to not only one's actions, but also their consequences. Right? And one's held not only to one's actions, but their consequences. So let's say you're running out of space. So you decided, you got this 43-inch monitor. So you decided that I have a small apartment, I'm going to hang it from my balcony. You hung it from your balcony, but the rope went loose, and Auntie Shireen's walking down the street with some supplies for her delivery service. But now she has to walk because the van got trashed by the previous wrong intercession. Monitor falls on her supplies. She loses the next month's worth of supplies because the monitor smashed. You're not just responsible for your action, which is, I just hung my monitor from my balcony. You're responsible for its consequences. So the broader principle, right, is that just as you're responsible for the action, the consequences, you're also responsible for the intention. Because let's say someone saw the case of the hanging monitor, so they don't like their neighborhood. They're all racists. So what they decided to do, they decided to hang something from their balcony to let's see who it hits of these racist folk. And Brother Ahmed just walking down the street trying to do some dhikr, and he got hit on the head by some heavy object. Because there it's obvious. Why? Because that's the consequence of someone's action. But when you do something with ill intent, you are responsible for the intention behind your action as well. So you're responsible with respect to actions in 3 matters: the action itself, its consequence, but also its intention. Because you hung the monitor, you're hoping that loose string will break. It never did. You're still responsible for your ill intent. But as we will see, with good intercession, wrongful deeds, Allah does not multiply them in their consequence. You are held responsible for your intention, what you did, and its consequences. But Allah does not multiply the consequence of our ill deeds. But we're held responsible for the implications, though. And the implications can be long-standing. So this is the hadith, right? The Quranic verse here from Surah An-Nisa, verse 58, that whoever intercedes with a wrongful intercession shall have the full share of it, of their intention, their action, and its consequence. Okay. Then there's hadiths of our beloved Prophet ﷺ. Amongst them, he says, وأخرج أبو داود والطبراني والحاكم عن سيدنا ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما أنه قال قال لأنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من حالت شفاعته دون حد من حدود الله فقد ضاد الله تعالى. Right? That whoever intercedes to prevent the application of a limit of the limits of Allah has opposed Allah Most High. Right? Because and this relates directly to the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what we call the had punishments. The had punishments, as we study, are the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when they apply, for example, there's highway robbers, and they're caught, all the conditions of being punished for highway robbery apply. And these have a wisdom and purpose, which is to prevent public harm. But that lady who crashed your van became your good friend, but then she took on highway robbery, and she got caught for it. So she's about to be punished by Qazi Hussein. So you go and intercede. So Qazi Hussein, we used to study together with Shaykh Saab, may Allah have mercy on him. Let her go, she's had a tough time. I hired her and bankrupted her and a whole bunch of stuff. You can't do that, right? Because here you're wrongfully interceding. The punishment is deserved, right? And for you to wrongfully intercede, you have opposed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This applies most directly to hudud, but to other things as well, right? Someone is a criminal. They deserve jail. They're unrepentant, but they're your cousin. So you go, whether by your influence or by your money, but if it's with your money, it's not only wrong intercession, but it's also bribery, rashwa, which is the Prophet ﷺ cursed those who give bribes and those who accept bribes. And we'll be coming to that from the sins of our outward actions. So wrongful intercession, right, related to the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is particularly grave. And say, but I was helping someone out. The ulama say that you have to keep in mind that in interceding, there's 4 considerations. There's 4 considerations. Sorry about that. The first is the one requesting the intercession. And sometimes we care the one requesting the intercession, so we intercede. But there's also the one requested. Sometimes we intercede because we have concerns ourselves. Oh, how do I say no? What about this? And we'll see some of the causes of that. Shyness, fear, allegiance, etc. But these are 2 considerations, the one requesting and you. But you also have to consider in interceding the 3rd criterion, which is the one who is affected, the one you're interceding to, right? So Auntie Shireen started her business and she's looking for a reliable driver. Now someone comes up and they want the work. So you don't only think about the one who's requesting you, and you don't think about your own considerations. You also have to consider the one you're interceding to. And the 4th thing you have to consider is how you intercede. How you intercede. Why? Because sometimes there could be a right intercession, but you could exert wrongful influence through a threat, for example. You go to Uncle Jamil and said, Uncle Jamil, please hire Brother Ahmed, otherwise I'll divorce your daughter. He goes, Beta, you tell me who else you want to hire. Lifetime guarantee, don't divorce my daughter. You could be my HR man, right? That's not allowed. Or if there's money involved, right? Or if you lie, cheat, or deceive. Say this person is qualified, but they're not. Another type of wrong intercession is where you intercede for someone or recommend someone, but don't disclose that they are your family, which is unethical, right? And it's Islamically, it's a breach of trust. Why? Because when you intercede, you are being entrusted by someone and you are being trusted by someone. So intercession is a trust. Right? You're being entrusted by the one you're interceding on their behalf. That's good. But that's a voluntary trust. You don't have to intercede for anybody. You may say, I can't take this on. But the other part is the one you're interceding to. Right? So this is something that requires concern. There are many examples of wrongful intercession. So he gives some key examples. So he says, وَهِيَ كَثِيرًا. There are many types. So he mentions, مِنْهَا الشَّفَاعَةُ لتقليد القضاء والإمارة والتولية مطلقة لورود النهي عن طلبها والشفاعة فيها. So the first category is interceding for positions of leadership. Interceding for positions of leadership. Meaning, someone wants a position of leadership and you help them get it. So there's several reasons for this, right? And so he mentions, such as to become the judge, right? And this was one of the most prestigious and highest of posts, to be appointed a judge. And it's a great post, but also the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Qudatu Thalatha, that judges are of three types. 2 are in hell, and only 1 is in heaven. 2 are in hell, and only 1 type is in heaven. And he explains, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the one who judges without knowledge is in hell for judging without knowledge. Secondly, the one who judges with knowledge, but willfully judges contrary to what they know to be correct, is in hell, meaning worthy of punishment for that. The only judge who is safe is the one who knows and who judges on the basis of their knowledge. They're not swayed in their judgment by other matters. So this applies to being a judge, also for positions of political leadership, imara, and for other positions of authority in general. Why? Firstly, because you're not doing this a service to the one who's seeking a position of leadership. And this is particularly with respect to, we can say, public leadership. The judicial system, the political system, and other positions of public leadership. Someone wants to become the mayor. And you decide, I'm going to help them out. Now, to intercede in order to help them seek leadership is against the principles of our deen. And people who consider religion when making their public choices, which are unfortunately reasonably few, how we participate in the political sphere has to be governed by our principles. That seeking leadership is, and we'll see that later, seeking leadership is against the Sunnah. And this is seeking leadership as leadership. Someone says, I want to become the mayor of Brampton. Why? The default is because they want that position. The Prophet ﷺ said, we do not grant leadership to those who seek it. And there's nuance to it. If someone wants to serve, and this is how they want to serve others, or someone wants to fulfill a fard kifaya, a public responsibility, and this is the means to fulfill it, then that is. But the way of safety in that is they consult and others put them forward. They don't put themselves forward. The Prophet ﷺ said that, do not seek leadership, because if you seek it for yourself, you will be left to it, meaning by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People may support you because you give a whole bunch of people kickbacks, but you'll be left to it. But if it is given to you without seeking, then you will be assisted in it, meaning by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's given to you without seeking it, and you are fit for it and committed to fulfilling the trust, then Allah will assist you in it. So this does not mean that a Muslim can't run for public office, but how they do so, why they do so, and to think through the consequence is important, but also, so just someone wants to be a leader, right? It's like someone made the mistake. So where my parents live is a bit of a vote bank, because there's 90 Muslim houses or some, all in the same community. And there should be a warning during election time at my parents' door, because my mother is good at giving people there. Because many times, there've been like Muslims who first time they ever showed up is when they're running for office, local or provincial or national. And once actually, one candidate actually said, "Could you just wait a second?" And he took out his laptop and started taking notes. My mother was later reasonably impressed by this person, but that you can't just come. Said, why do you want to represent our area? And the person had no good ideas. What are you going to do for us? And right, what are you doing? What are you going to do for Mississauga? What are you going to do for this? What are you going? And the person basically said they're just running because they want a position. Okay? And my mother laid it on somewhat thick, but it was very smart. And those are the questions one asks of someone seeking leadership. Now, if someone is doing it with the right drive, right? The same thing, intention, action, consequence, right? And they thought that through, then yes, one may support them, but it appears primarily for the leadership or is unconsidered. Why? Because positions of leadership have a lot of dangerous consequences. Even the best of leaders, there are difficult decisions you have to make. Right? There is very difficult decisions you have to make, and that you have to make consistently. So this has implications with respect to people who run for office, etc., but also has community implications for us in terms of who you recommend for things like becoming the imam. Right? Because that's a public office. For who should be hired by our public institutions, because they're a trust. And recommending someone just because they're your friend, they're your family, for random reasons is not a fulfillment of trust. Now, sometimes someone could fulfill the criterion, right? So that would at least fulfill the trust. The way to fulfill the trust is there's a minimum trust, which is the person is fit for what you are interceding for. Right? That's the basic fulfillment of trust. A good fulfillment of trust, that they're not just, they fulfill the criteria, but they would be good for it. So then you can make a recommendation. Right? That unlike the previous recommendation, this, and it's a women's only company, this lady, I've heard from my wife and others, she drives carefully. Right? She's a certified whatever kind of driver. Okay. So that's a good recommendation. An excellent recommendation is where you feel someone would be the right person for the job. Not just good, but within your scope, you feel that this person is right for the job. And how you recommend would be governed by that. That, do they fulfill the requirements? Are they good for it? Are they the right person? These are 3 levels of intercession. And public intercession is the most consequence because it has public consequence, whether it be judicial, political, or communal. And we are plagued often by poor leadership in our community institutions. Why? Because someone's in charge. Who do they hire? Just people they feel like hiring, not because they fulfill the criteria. If they fulfill the criteria, that's at least acceptable. If they're good, that's better. أداء الأمانة على الوجه الكمال, a full fulfillment is they try to find within your capacity the right person for the job. And it's tough. It's not easy, right? But that's where one should strive. Another implication aspect of this, he says, ومنها الشفاعة للإمامة لمن ليس أهلا لها أو وجد من هو أولى بها, or interceding for work, particularly religious, like interceding for someone to become the imam when they're not fit for it. That is the basic non-fulfillment of trust. Or an improper fulfillment of trust when they are fit for the work, but you are aware of other people who would be more fit for it. وكذا الأذان والتعليم والتدريس ونحوه. And likewise, giving the adhan, teaching, and the like. Right? Sometimes teaching, whether it be religious teaching, ta'aleem, or tadris, or non-religious teaching, and the like of it. And the religious roles are mentioned because they have greater consequences. They have greater consequences. Many places you go and you find people hiring for masjids and stuff for the strangest reasons. I went to one place on the east coast of the US, and of course the person who drove me from the community organization didn't know they're on the board of the community organization. They wanted to drive me, brought their fancy car. I didn't really care. It was a bit tight actually because of a fancy car. But board member person did not know the address, or actually the location of their own masjid that they're on the board of, which is a bit of a... So they drove because it was the Islamic center of a particular city, but the center was in the suburb. Right? Like, let's say SeekersGuidance Toronto wouldn't be in Toronto, would be in Mississauga. But they went to the same address, 10 High Street, in Toronto rather than Mississauga. I'm not going to mention the state because I don't want to shame anyone. Anyways, so we showed up 40 minutes late for the program. Masjid was full, kind of curious masjid, because it used to be a church. Anyways, I started my talk, which is on the strong believer. Okay. I just begin explaining the hadith. Imam raises his hands. It's very obviously Imam, sitting right at the front. I'm speaking in English. He asked me in Urdu, Shaykh Jeev, and I'll just say it in English, can kafir people enter the masjid? That has nothing to do with the hadith of the strong believer. I said, Maulana, after the lesson, inshallah. He says, okay, yes, and they spoke unnecessarily after, which is not what you do in there's a lecture being given. It's not even a class, because in a class, it could be more interactive, just like a formal talk. And turns out the imam was just relative of some of the board members, so they hired him from a rural area, from a particular country, and he'd barely learned Quran, like he'd memorized Quran, but didn't have knowledge of Quran, let alone, he didn't even own a book of tafsir. So when you because he said, I was wondering about the Quranic verse, I said, what did you find in tafsir? Where would I find tafsir? So you're imam of a masjid, you don't even know where to find the tafsir. It doesn't know English, just knew regional language. Anyways, so that's wrong intercession. And positions within community responsibility, they're not necessarily public positions, but they have community. Those are communal trusts, non-profits, masajid, other projects. So you don't just hire friends, family, and your people for that, because that's a trust. The religious, but also for worldly matters. Because there, the implication is more limited, but you're harming the person you intercede to. Right? So these are types of wrongful intercession. Then Imam Birgivi tells us, why do people do this? Right? Why do people do this? And the first is sort of a blanket excuse. He says, الأول الجهل والطمع وحب الأقرباء والأحباء وحب الله وحب نفسه أولى وأجل. So the first cause is ignorance or avidness and the love of others. So ignorance, you didn't even think about it. You didn't even think about it. You just did it. Why not? So someone started a steakhouse and they say, we're looking for chefs. He says, oh, Brother Ahmed wants to go into this field. And he didn't. He was thinking of making steaks at home. He wants to be a steak guy. He goes, he burns down the whole place because he didn't know how to turn on the gas stove. So ignorance, you didn't think it through. Or being avid, right? Avidness, why? Because influence is something people are keen to exert. You want to show who's influenced? Look, I got so-and-so hired, etc. But also, the innate love we have for family and friends. Right? We have attachments. Love, right, is inclination, is attachment, inclination, and choice. Right? So the innate love, meaning that attachment, inclination, and choice, that we would choose if we were given a choice, who we want to see hired somewhere. You'd want friends, family, or people you like there. They may not be the right person. So in this, he points to the cure. He says, Allah and love of Allah and love for oneself comes first. Why does love for oneself comes first? Because on the day of resurrection, you can't, like you have a whole bunch of sins for wrongful intercession, but I was helping other people out. Right? First person you're responsible for is yourself. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, Ibda binafsika thumma man ta'ul. Begin with yourself, then those you're responsible for. Right? So that's the first cause of wrongful intercession, ignorance or avidness, or just ignorantly preferring the love of creation, family, friends, and others, over consideration of what choice is beloved to Allah. Second, وَالْحَيَاءُ مِنَ النَّاسِ is feeling shy before people. وَالْحَيَاءُ مِنَ الْخَالِقِ الضَّارِّ النَّافِعِ أقدم وألزم. So he says that feeling shyness from people. What will people say? What if I don't intercede? What will they say? What will other people say? But if I didn't? But he says, but feeling shy before Allah, the Creator, the one alone who can benefit or harm you, comes before and is more incumbent upon you. A shyness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why shyness, the ulama say broadly, shyness is of three types. Haya, you have a natural shyness. It is called al-haya al-tabi'i, a natural shyness. And we know that the sound fitra would incline as one gains consciousness towards covering oneself, etc. That is an Adamic sense that Allah has put in the children of Adam, unlike other animals. But then there is, that's al-haya al-tabi'i. Then you have al-haya'u min al-nas, is shyness before people. Most people wouldn't clean out their teeth in front of people by opening their mouth. Some people would, which is shocking, but by sticking their fingers in their mouth, or they wouldn't clean their nose by sticking little finger in their nose in front of people, etc. That's haya min al-nas, being shy before people. Some of that is good. Some of that is part of the merits of civilization. Right? Some of that's from the merits of civilization. Right? And without civilization, most people would behave like animals, sadly. It has a good part. A good part. And that's part of the haya min al-nas. There's a merit in being with people, traveling with people, living with people, etc. It keeps people in check. But there's a detrimental aspect to that when that haya min al-nas causes one to act in a manner that goes against good and God. Okay? What is right, what is good and right and pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third level of haya is haya min Allah, is shyness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a general principle hadith, Allahu ahaqqu an yustaha minhu min al-nas. Allah is more deserving of our haya, of our shyness, than people are. So ulama deduce from that there is a type of shyness before people that's good. Someone sitting at home, there's one of the scholars, every time, I've gone and knocked on their door, they've put on a cap. That's part of modesty, diffidence, etc. It's a good thing. Even if they weren't wearing it when they're sitting on their own, perhaps. So that is, but leaving what is entailed by shyness before Allah because of what people will say, that is a blameworthy shyness. That's a blameworthy shyness. And this often applies when one intercedes. And one did not think that, is this intercession pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The third reason, he says, وَالْخَوْفُ مِنَ الْعَدَاوَةِ, fear of enmity. أو ذهاب المنصب, or fear of losing one's position. أو الرزق, or losing one's source of income. أو الدار, or losing the house. فالله أحق أن يخشاه, but Allah is more deserving of our fear. Allah is more deserving of our fear. That, Zubair and Zubaydah are married. Uncle Jamil says, Beta, that job you got? I heard they're hiring. What about my son Khalid? And Khalid's like, the reason he's not working, you know why he's not working? Because you go every weekend to Zubair goes every weekend to his in-laws and sees. He's lazy, he's not dropped out of everything, he's not really trying to do anything. And now, unless he changes his ways, if he goes to work, same thing's going to happen. So for you to intercede, but you're afraid. Right? So there's shyness, but also fear. What's the fear? Uncle Jamil pulls the strings on Zubaydah. So what will happen to Zubaydah? Or maybe he's afraid of Uncle Jamil, maybe he's afraid of Zubaydah. Because Zubaydah, daddy says it, daddy's right. Like that, her father's her blind spot. So, there one has to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? وَلَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. Remembering Allah is greater. Right? So these are three of the causes. Ignorance, and just one's natural inclinations, avidness, liking one's friends, family, others, or shyness or fear. And that's why hastiness is from the devil, and circumspection brings good. So then he tells us about the good intercession, right? And it's a great Quranic encouragement for this. So he says, وَضِدُّهُ الشَّفَاعَةُ الْحَسَنَةُ. The opposite is good intercession. And he mentions, قال الله تعالى من يشفع شفاعة حسنة يكن له نصيب منها. Whoever intercedes with a good intercession shall have their full share of it. Right? Shall have their full share of it. From Surah An-Nisa, verse 58. And you can read the tafsir of this noble verse. Whoever intercedes with a good intercession. Now, Ibn Ashur and others point out that intercession in the Arabic language, shafa'ah, is used only for the good. Literally. Because, and that's part of Arabic's an amazing language, because if you're a rational being, you would intercede only when it's the right thing to do. Right? And that's the purpose of society, civilization, all these things. Anyways. So whoever intercedes in the good shall have a full share of it. Right? Shall have a full share of it. Right? And intercession is to come between in a matter that facilitates good reaching the party you're interceding for. Or you can also intercede in order for harm to be averted. They're wrongfully evicting somebody because their check reached a day late. It's not a very reasonable thing because they didn't consider that there was a strike. So you go and intercede to avoid harm. Right? And one can intercede, Ibn Ashur says in his tafsir, At-Tahrir wa Tanwir, whether the person asked or whether they didn't. Whether they didn't. Right? Whether they didn't. And there's many examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. In that, one of them is that the Prophet ﷺ used to walk behind his companions. And he said, when asked, that leave my back to my companions. But one of the reasons he used to check that was someone sad or down or in difficulty or distress, and he would strive to assist them. Right? Without them asking. And that's interceding without someone asking. And then he mentions this great hadith of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that وأخرج البخاري ومسلم من عن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله تعالى عنه. So Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim relate from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم جالسا فجاء رجل. So the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم was sitting and a man came. فأقبل علينا بوجهه. So the man directed himself to them. So the Prophet ﷺ turned facing the companions. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ turned to his companion and he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, ishfa'u tu'jaru. Intercede and you shall be rewarded. وَيَقْضِ اللَّهُ عَلَى لِسَانِ رَسُولِهِ مَا شَاءَ. And Allah will fulfill on the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ whatsoever He wills. Meaning that the man had some needs. So whoever intercedes, meaning facilitate the fulfillment of his needs, you will be rewarded for that. But Allah will fulfill on the tongue of His Prophet ﷺ what He wills. Which has several things, right? One is, insofar as there's reward promised for whoever intercedes. But also the intercession can just be by general encouragement. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged them. Ishfa'u tu'jaru. Intercede, help him fulfill the task, right? Someone's looking for work, someone's looking for someone to help him out financially, etc. So it can be by general encouragement, but they say the general encouragement is effective if you know people will be avid to fulfill it, or by directly doing it if that's what is required, right? وفي رواية, and in another narration, it has come أنه كان صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أتاه طالب حاجة أقبل على جلسائه فقال اشفعوا تؤجروا. الحديث. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ, if any person with a need would come, he would turn to those sitting with him and said, intercede and you shall be rewarded. Right? Intercede and you shall be rewarded. Because the Prophet ﷺ's habit was that if someone came with a request, the Prophet ﷺ would either fulfill it or help them in the fulfillment of it, or point them to, or encourage others to assist in the fulfillment of it, or at the very least share facilitative words. And all of them is from fulfilling a need. Someone comes to you and says, I want to work for you, but they can't drive. All you need is delivery people. The sunnah would be, well, you can't hire them because there's nothing you can do for them, but you can point them to say, well, I know that, because let's say your whole family made a commitment to start working, said my sister, my niece, my cousin, and actually my cousin's grandmother are all hiring. These are their contacts, and give me your contact, I'll share it with them. We've started the Women's Miss Saga Entrepreneurial Network. Okay. So that is an important sunnah, right? And this can be done both if someone comes and they asks, but also if they come and it's understood that they're in need. And one example of that was, for example, the hadith related to praying during the Jum'ah khutbah, which actually is difference of opinion. Do you pray during the khutbah or not? And there's difference. Hanafis and Malikis don't. Shafi'is do. But the Prophet ﷺ was giving a khutbah, and a man came and he sat down. So the Prophet ﷺ stopped. And he asked him, have you prayed? The man said, no. So he told him to get up and pray. So, and if you're Shafi'i, you would pray if you entered even during the khutbah. The Hanafis don't, but the Hanafis and the Malikis looked at the context and what the companion said, that when the Prophet ﷺ told the man to get up and pray, the Prophet ﷺ paused the khutbah and he was looking at the man. So the Sahaba were looking at the man. And afterwards he talked about giving in charity and helping those in need. Some of the companions said, so we understood from that the Prophet ﷺ wanted us to help this man. Now, how you piece the evidence together, that's a legal matter that you can learn in the various schools. But so Hanafis and Malikis consider the hadith to be contextual and not conditioning of the general principle that you don't pray during the khutbah. The Shafi'is say, no, the Prophet ﷺ said, stand up and pray. That applies to anyone else. That context, according to the Shafi'is, is speculative. Anyways, the Prophet ﷺ interceded for people when they requested, but also when it wasn't directly requested. And then the final hadith, وأخرج أبو داود عن معاوية رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال اشفعوا تؤجروا فإني لأريد الأمر كيما تؤجروا, right? فإني لأدخر الأمر كيما تؤجروا. Says, intercede so that you may be rewarded. For sometimes I save up a matter for you to be rewarded for it. Sometimes I save up a matter for you to be rewarded for it. Right? Because these things are not burdens. These are not burdens, they're opportunities. They're opportunities for reward. Right? So, and you see this, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would know there's a number of things that are needed to be done. He'd get them all done right away. But he would save it up so that people could come forward to fulfill that. But of course, that's in the event where people will step forward and do it. Very often, that may not be the case, right? And in my recent trip, saw that very clearly. That, this is one of the scholars trying to establish a seminary in the earthquake-affected area. And there's all these people who are part of the group of friends of, supporters of Shaykh. They'll sit there praising, even those who are in the same town that he is. Shaykh, mashallah, you're doing so much hard work. And they're not helping him. So, mashallah, we love how the Shaykh himself, so the Shaykh's there from Fajr till after Isha. I talk to him several times a week. And he's picking up rocks and this and that and doing all these things. And what are they doing? Just saying, mashallah, our Shaykh is so awesome. Mashallah, he does all this stuff. What are they doing to help him? Precious little. There's another scholar trying to convince that, Shaykh, why don't you hire someone to help you out in some of these things? He said, the staff I have working with me, if they show up every couple of days and just say, Assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa sahlan, I'll say ahleen wa sahleen, and I'll just register that they're there. If you want to do anything, you kind of have to do it yourself. And the Shaykh runs many projects. And that's the sad reality that, as the Prophet ﷺ said, people are like camels. Out of every 100, it's hard to find one that is fit for a long journey. But that's the nature of the weak, distracted, and hasty human being, particularly when it comes to the abstract, like being of benefit to community, being of benefit, service to the deen. Most people have no such real concern. They may have imagined concerns, but true concerns are those that are lived actively. Right? So that's what we want to talk about, the good intercession. Next week we'll look at the sin of commanding the wrong or forbidding the good, and the opposite, which is commanding the good and forbidding the wrong. And it's a very important lesson on understanding the principles of, firstly, the harm of commanding the wrong. And it's not just by commanding, but also sharing sinful things is from this, and the opposite, which is a tremendous virtue. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for steadfastness and clarity, and to make us of the people of trust. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa barakallahu ta'ala fikum.